The Senate chamber was tense, cameras buzzing like hornets, every lens locked on the two figures at the center of the storm. On one side stood Senator John Neely Kennedy, his signature calm masking a storm of conviction. Across from him, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, her tone sharp, her words rapid, her passion blazing like gasoline on dry grass. The air between them crackled with the kind of friction that only truth and denial could produce. AOC was in full flight, her voice rising above the murmurs of the room. "Senator, the world is changing. People are tired of outdated systems run by men who refuse to adapt. We're here to reshape America, to build something fairer." She pointed her finger for emphasis, her eyes burning with defiance. Kennedy didn't flinch. He just leaned back in his chair, eyes half-lidded, that familiar smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Congresswoman," he began, his southern drawl smooth as honey but sharp as barbed wire, "I've listened to you for 10 minutes, and I still can't tell if you're preachin' a sermon or sellin' a fantasy." A wave of chuckles rippled through the room, but AOC pressed on. "You can mock all you want, Senator, but people are suffering. We need bold ideas, not tired jokes." Kennedy stood, his voice now steady and commanding. "Bold ideas don't mean good ideas, ma'am. The problem with your party is, I don't even recognize it anymore, and to tell you the truth," he paused, letting the silence hang for a beat, "I don't much care." The words landed like a hammer. Reporters froze mid-typing, even the cameras seemed to hesitate. AOC blinked, caught off guard, her rebuttal momentarily stuck behind clenched teeth. Kennedy continued, eyes locked on her. "You've traded reason for rage, and facts for feelings. That's not progress, that's theater." The audience erupted, half cheering, half gasping. Kennedy adjusted his glasses and took his seat, the faintest grin cutting through the noise. The fight had only just begun, the Senate chamber felt like a live wire, reporters whispering, aides texting furiously, cameras swiveling to capture every second of the brewing storm. Kennedy sat back, calm as a preacher at Sunday service, while AOC paced like a storm about to hit land. Her expression was sharp, every gesture designed for impact. "Senator," she said, her voice steady but rising, "you talk about reason and facts while your party ignores both. You've let lobbyists write your policies, and billionaires bankroll your truth." Kennedy tilted his head, unimpressed. "Well now, that's a mighty fancy accusation, Congresswoman. Trouble is, it don't come with evidence, just slogans." He leaned forward slightly, lowering his tone just enough to draw everyone in. "See, you talk about helping people, but what you're sellin' is a dream with no foundation, like buildin' a house on sand and callin' it progress." AOC shot back, "At least we're trying to build something, Senator. You sit there quoting old sayings while people can't afford rent." Kennedy chuckled softly. "Ma'am, I grew up around folks who didn't have much. They didn't need Washington to save them, they needed Washington to stop getting in their way." His voice hardened, losing the playful edge. "You say you're fighting for the people. But the truth is, you're fighting against common sense." A murmur swept through the chamber, even some Democrats exchanged uneasy glances. AOC raised her chin defiantly. "Maybe common sense isn't enough anymore." Kennedy's eyes narrowed just slightly, his tone cool as steel. "Then maybe that's why your party don't make sense anymore." The crowd gasped again, the quote was destined for headlines. Kennedy's words carried the weight of conviction, while AOC's fire burned hot but uncontrolled. Somewhere in that room, truth and theater were dancing a dangerous waltz, and Kennedy was leading every step. The hearing room buzzed with tension, every senator and journalist sensing that this wasn't just another debate, it was a defining clash between two Americas. Kennedy leaned forward, elbows on the desk, his gaze locked on AOC like a hawk sizing up a restless sparrow. "You see, Congresswoman," he began slowly, "your side keeps sayin' the system's broken. But from where I sit, the only thing broken is your trust in the people who built it." AOC fired back instantly. "The system is broken, Senator. It was designed by people who never had to live paycheck to paycheck, who never faced real discrimination, who never had to fight just to be seen. Kennedy raised an eyebrow, his drawl steady and deliberate. I reckon the founders didn't put fairness on a schedule, ma'am. They built a system where anyone could earn their way, not demand it handed to them. The line drew audible reactions, murmurs, applause, even a few gasps. AOC slammed her hand lightly on the table, frustration peeking through her composure. You're defending inequality as tradition. Kennedy's voice cut through like a blade. No, ma'am. I'm defendin' responsibility as freedom. He paused, letting the words settle like thunder after lightning. You can't fix this country by punishin' success and callin' it justice. Reporters were scribbling furiously, headlines already forming. Kennedy to AOC, responsibility is freedom. AOC crossed her arms, her tone shifting to icy precision. So, you think compassion is weakness? Kennedy smiled, just a flicker. Not at all. But when compassion turns into control, it stops being kindness, and starts being tyranny with a smile. The room went silent. The ideological line was drawn deep, between Kennedy's realism and AOC's revolution. By now, the hearing room had turned into a circus of flashing cameras and clicking pens. The crowd wasn't just watching, they were choosing sides. Hashtags like hashtag Kennedy destroys AOC and hashtag AOC strikes back were already trending online. But inside the chamber, Kennedy and AOC were locked in a duel that went far beyond politics. It was about the soul of the country. AOC leaned forward, eyes narrowing. You keep talking about responsibility, Senator, but tell me this, where's your responsibility to the people who can't make it on their own? To the families crushed by a system you keep defending? Kennedy's smile didn't waver. He spoke softly, but his words hit hard. Ma'am, my responsibility is to protect the people who still believe in their keep, not waitin' on Washington like it's Santa Claus. The audience gasped, some clapped, others scowled. AOC exhaled sharply, her voice gaining speed. That's not leadership, that's cruelty disguised as tradition. We're supposed to lift people up. Kennedy nodded slightly. And I agree, Congresswoman. But you can't lift folks up by weighing down the ones still climbin'. You say you want equality, what you're buildin' is dependency. That landed like a punch. Even some of AOC's own aides looked uneasy. Kennedy continued, his tone like calm thunder. I've met the kind of folks your policies claim to help. They don't want pity. They want a chance, without all the strings attached. AOC crossed her arms, defiant but faltering. So, what, Senator? We just let people drown? Kennedy leaned back, the faintest grin crossing his face. No, ma'am. We teach 'em how to swim. The chamber erupted again, laughter, applause, outrage all mixing together. Kennedy didn't raise his voice once, but somehow, he owned the room. The debate had stopped being about policy a long time ago, it was now about philosophy, about what kind of America each side believed in. Kennedy sat with quiet composure, his hands clasped, his tone calm but unyielding. You know, Congresswoman, he began, his southern accent rolling smooth but firm, where I come from, we were taught that government's supposed to be a referee, not a player on the field. But your crowd seems dead set on turning it into the whole team, the cheerleaders, and the scoreboard. AOC fired back instantly. That's because the referee's been rigged, Senator. The game's been fixed for decades. The rich win, the poor lose, and you call that fair play? Kennedy nodded slowly, almost respectfully. You may be right that some folks cheat. But when your solution is to burn down the stadium, ma'am, don't be surprised when nobody's left to play. The gallery chuckled. AOC's jaw tightened, her patience thinning. You think this is funny? People are starving, losing homes. Kennedy raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. No, ma'am. I don't think it's funny. I think it's tragic. But what's more tragic is watching good intentions get twisted into bad ideas. You call it compassion. I call it control. His words settled like dust in the air, heavy, visible, undeniable. AOC's response came slower this time. So, you'd rather do nothing? Just let the system keep crushing people? Kennedy tilted his head slightly. No, I'd rather fix the foundation before repainting the roof. You can't build justice on chaos. For a moment, even AOC had no reply. The silence wasn't empty, it was respect, reluctant but real. Kennedy leaned back, his expression softening. You see, ma'am, I ain't angry with your heart. I'm just worried about your compass. The room erupted in murmurs, one part admiration, one part awe. Kennedy had done what he always did best, made truth sound simple and unshakable. The debate had stretched on for nearly 2 hours, and the tension in the Senate chamber had turned heavy, thick enough to taste. The cameras never blinked, capturing every glance, every smirk, every word that hit like a punch. Kennedy rested one arm on the mahogany desk, cool as a lake in winter. Across from him, AOC's expression burned with frustration, conviction, and just a trace of exhaustion. Senator, she said finally, her voice trembling slightly but strong, you talk about freedom like it's a weapon. But freedom without fairness isn't freedom, it's privilege. Kennedy nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Then, in that slow Louisiana drawl, he said, and fairness without freedom, ma'am, is just a fancy word for control. The room went dead silent. Even the clicking of cameras paused. AOC blinked, clearly not expecting the quiet gravity of that line. Kennedy leaned forward, his gaze cutting through the noise. You keep saying you want equality, but what you're really proposing is obedience, to a government that thinks it knows better than the people who feed it. AOC shot back, her tone sharper. You're twisting my words. We're trying to make a government that cares. Kennedy didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. Caring don't require control, Congresswoman. My mama cared plenty, but she didn't need to run my life to do it. The line drew a ripple of laughter and applause, even from some unlikely corners of the room. AOC's lips tightened, she tried to redirect. You sound like you miss an America that never really existed. Kennedy's eyes softened, just a flicker of sadness behind the steel. No, ma'am, he said quietly. I miss the America that knew the difference between helpin' people and handlin' 'em. That single sentence didn't just hang in the air, it echoed. The chamber had become a courtroom, and Kennedy's words were the verdict. By the time the 7th hour of debate rolled around, even the marble walls of the Senate chamber seemed to lean in closer. The line between argument and reckoning had vanished. This wasn't policy anymore, it was philosophy, pride, and raw truth colliding under the brightest lights in Washington. AOC took a long breath, glancing toward the press gallery where hundreds of cameras waited like vultures. Senator, she began, her tone measured, you keep talking about freedom as if it's enough. But freedom doesn't fill stomachs. Freedom doesn't heal the sick. It doesn't keep the lights on. Kennedy leaned forward, clasping his hands. Ma'am, with all due respect, freedom's the only thing that can fill those stomachs, if we'd stop choking it with red tape and false promises. AOC raised her voice now, the strain breaking through. False promises? You mean expecting the richest country on earth to care for its people? Kennedy sighed softly, tilting his head. Care's one thing. Control's another. Y'all dress it up pretty, call it progress, but it's just a leash with lipstick. The audience erupted, laughter, applause, outrage, and disbelief tangled in one roaring wave. Even the reporters couldn't hide their grins or gasps. AOC tried to recover, shaking her head. You love talking about the past, Senator. Maybe because that's the only place your ideas still work. Kennedy's smile faded. He looked straight at her, not angry, not amused, but tired of the noise. The past ain't my prison, Congresswoman. It's my teacher. And it taught me that when government starts thinking it's the savior, the people start forgetting how to save themselves. The words hit hard, not like a punch, but like a bell tolling for a truth too big to ignore. Even AOC's expression softened for a moment, her next line dying on her lips. For the first time that night, the crowd was quiet. Kennedy had spoken not to win, but to remind. The silence that followed Kennedy's last line felt almost sacred. The entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. AOC glanced down at her notes, her fingers tightening around the paper as if looking for something solid to grab onto. Kennedy just sat there, calm, unmoving, the still center of a political storm he had no intention of running from. Finally, AOC looked up, her tone quieter now but laced with defiance. You act like government's the enemy, Senator. But you are the government. You sit in power, make the laws, and then blame the very system you control. Kennedy nodded, slow and steady. You're right about one thing, ma'am. I am part of it. But I never said I liked what it's become. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to that slow, deliberate rhythm that always made his words land like scripture. Used to be, Washington worked for the people. Now it works for the loudest bidder. Used to be we argued ideas, now we just trade insults and hashtags. AOC tried to interject, but Kennedy's voice rolled over hers, calm but unstoppable. And somewhere along the line, your party decided feelings were more important than facts. You stopped representing the folks who build this country, and started representing the folks who shout the loudest about it. The audience murmured, some clapped quietly. Even those who disagreed couldn't deny the weight in his words. AOC finally snapped, "You're twisting this, Senator. You think empathy is weakness. It's not weakness, it's strength." Kennedy smiled gently, the kind of smile that carried disappointment more than scorn. Empathy's noble, ma'am. But when it blinds you to consequences, it turns from mercy to madness. The air crackled. The younger Congresswoman stared at him, realizing she'd lost control of the narrative. Kennedy wasn't just debating her, he was defining her argument. He leaned back, unhurried, and added softly, "I don't recognize your party anymore, Congresswoman. But from the sound of it, neither do you." The chamber fell into stunned silence, again. The words lingered like smoke, heavy, visible, impossible to ignore. Even AOC, who'd built her career on comebacks and conviction, faltered for just a second. The camera zoomed in. You could almost hear the collective inhale of a nation watching live, liberals ready to defend her, conservatives ready to cheer him, and millions of Americans caught somewhere in between. Kennedy adjusted his glasses, his tone even but sharp. "You see, ma'am, I don't say this out of spite. I say it because I remember when we could argue without turning every disagreement into a moral war. When folks could believe different things and still bow their heads at the same table." AOC straightened in her chair, her voice trembling between passion and frustration. "That sounds nice, Senator. But that world never existed for people like me. You talk about unity while ignoring inequality." Kennedy's response was slow, and devastatingly precise. "Equality, Congresswoman, doesn't mean making everyone the same. It means giving everyone the same chance to be something, without the government picking who wins." A ripple of approval swept the room. Kennedy didn't gloat, he just let it settle. "You call it compassion when you take from one man to give to another," he continued. "But if you rob Peter to pay Paul long enough, you'll start thinking theft is charity." Gasps. A murmur of disbelief. Someone in the press gallery whispered, "Did he just say that?" AOC's composure cracked. "You're defending greed," she shot back. Kennedy shook his head, his tone cooling like iron hardening. "No, ma'am. I'm defending choice, the kind your policies keep shrinking smaller every time you promise another handout." The applause this time was louder, not just from Kennedy's side, but from independents and even a few Democrats tired of the noise. And as the echoes faded, the look on Kennedy's face said everything. This wasn't about politics anymore. It was about drawing a line between belief and surrender. The moderator tried to step in, his voice shaky from the tension in the room. We'll take one final statement from each side. But it was too late. Kennedy had already leaned forward, his eyes steady, his drawl slow and deliberate, the sound of a man who'd said everything he needed to say, yet still had one truth left to drive home. "Congresswoman," he began, "you've got heart, I'll give you that. But heart without sense is like a car without brakes, it feels powerful right up until the crash." AOC's lips tightened. "You mock compassion, Senator. But maybe that's because you've forgotten what struggle looks like." Kennedy nodded once, his tone softening but not surrendering. "Struggle built this country, ma'am. But it also taught us not to hand over our freedom to the folks who promised to fix everything for us. You say government can solve it all, I say the American people already can, if we just get Washington out of their way." The chamber erupted in applause, the sound swelling like thunder. Kennedy didn't smile. He didn't need to. His words had already done the work, not loud, but lasting. AOC stood, straightening her blazer, her expression unreadable. "You really think people trust this government less than they trust each other?" she asked. Kennedy rose too, adjusting his tie, his voice dropping to a low, unshakable calm. "Ma'am, the day folks start trusting Washington more than their neighbor, that's the day America stops being America." The crowd rose with him, not all in agreement, but all in awe. The debate wasn't over, but the night belonged to Kennedy. Even AOC seemed to know it. She turned away first, leaving Kennedy at the microphone, his silhouette framed by the glare of camera lights. And as the feed cut to millions watching across the nation, one truth rang louder than any applause. He hadn't just won the argument, he'd reminded America why he still mattered. Senator John Kennedy stood at the podium long after the cameras stopped flashing, his tie loosened, his expression calm but resolute. The crowd had quieted, but the weight of what had been said still hung heavy in the air. He leaned into the microphone, his southern drawl steady, carrying the gravity of experience and the clarity of conviction. "Folks," he began, "I didn't come here tonight to make friends or headlines. I came here to tell the truth, and sometimes, the truth don't come wrapped in sugar." A soft murmur rippled through the audience. Kennedy continued, his tone low and unwavering. "We've got leaders in this town who talk more about feelings than facts, who think shouting louder means they're right. But I'll tell you what my mama told me, the loudest voice in the room usually has the least to say." The line drew a wave of applause, but Kennedy didn't bask in it. His gaze swept across the crowd, serious now. "I don't hate Democrats. I don't hate Republicans. I just hate what politics has turned decent folks into, angry, suspicious, and too scared to call a lie what it is. I may be old-fashioned, but I still believe in common sense, faith, and hard work, not hashtags and outrage." He paused, his tone softening with a note of reflection. "So if that makes me the odd man out, so be it. I didn't take this job to fit in. I took it to stand up." He tapped the microphone gently, then smiled, a tired, honest smile. "And as long as I've got breath left in me, I'll keep reminding folks that this country don't belong to Washington. It belongs to you, the people." The audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. Kennedy nodded once, stepped back from the